Welcome back everyone. Let's go ahead and talk about none other than the 2015 MacBook Air and why you should probably go and pick it up if you really want to. Now, to be completely honest, this is one of my favorite MacBooks that have ever came out. I think it's so beautiful. I think it still looks extremely good. There's really not that much to hate on it, as I always say. And I think this was the, signifying feature or one of the best MacBooks that year Apple had. Just 2015, they killed it. They had that 15-inch MacBook Pro, the 13-inch Retina MacBook Pro, then they had this thing, and I guess they had the first USB-C MacBook, which wasn't really amazing, but it got the, ball rolling in that direction. Now, if you want to pick up a MacBook Air, probably not this one. I'll leave a link on Amazon down below. You can go and pick up a MacBook from there, and you can help support the channel at the same time. Now, this MacBook, there were two different models. There was like an 11-inch model, and there was a 13-inch model. I really don't know anybody who has or owned that 11-inch models or any of these MacBooks. I think I saw one in real life, but for the most part, those 12-inch MacBooks really kind of covered up that smaller type of area, and even the MacBook Airs for a while. Now, this specific MacBook, the 15-inch one, there are a lot of pros, there's a few cons, but I've really only found one reason why you probably shouldn't pick it up. I think maybe like two max. It's the screen and maybe the performance. I think everything else about this MacBook still holds up, and when newer and newer MacBooks come out and they have less and less ports, it makes these MacBooks that at the time had even less ports than other MacBooks seem like they're like the best MacBooks ever in my opinion, which is so crazy. Now, as I mentioned, the body of this thing still feels extremely premium on any of these older MacBooks. These older MacBooks, Apple just killed it in my opinion. Now, closed, you do have that Apple logo on the front, which looks pretty similar to like the, MacBook Pros from 2015, 2014, 2013, and even every other MacBook Air. These things still look good. They have the glowing logo, and they really don't look too old in my opinion. Like, it still looks so beautiful. Now, opening this thing up, this is where we have a little bit of a difference, okay? We do have that 13.3-inch LED panel on the front, and it's not quite like the greatest resolution, and this is one of the, low lights of this device, you know what I mean? I think the panel of it really isn't that great compared to even in this day and age with the M1 MacBooks. Even though these MacBook Pros and all these stuff, even the MacBook Airs, they haven't really gotten a crazy refresh. Like, we still have the same amount of bezel from 2016 and stuff. The panel itself still looks really sharp on the MacBook Pros, MacBook Airs of this day and age, and that's probably one of the biggest reasons why the MacBook Air from 2015 and earlier than that really don't hold up. And that's kind of a disadvantage, if you're going to dock this thing up to a display and stuff, that's totally different. But the screen on this thing, to be completely honest, isn't that great. I hate to say it, I'm not the one to kind of overhype something if it's really bad. I still think the iPhone X is a great phone. I still think the 2012 Retina MacBook looks great. This thing is great, but the panel itself really isn't that good. So keep that in mind. And as I mentioned, that's one of, the lowlights of this device. Now, you have that standard keyboard on the bottom, which still holds up completely great. This keyboard on this thing is beautiful. And one of the best things, even when I feel this keyboard and I feel like my M1 MacBook keyboard, I really like, my M1 MacBook, but dude, those keyboards from back in the day are still superior in so many ways. I just don't know why. When I feel that MacBook and I mess with it, those keyboards are just so beautiful. And you also have that trackpad on the bottom as well. And I think that's a really awesome thing. I feel like when you have these type of MacBooks, especially these MacBook Airs, those are solid keyboards and solid trackpads. They don't really feel that old. They still feel great. And I think that's an awesome thing for sure with these type of devices. Now, flipping to the side, you can see that we kind of have a little bit of a different port selection from, our standard MacBook Pros of that year. But still, as I mentioned before, compared to this day and age, I really do miss some of these ports. So on the left side, you can see we have that MagSafe, port, which is still beautiful. I wish we still had that on these devices. We have that single USB port, and we have a headphone jack. I really hope Apple doesn't remove the headphone jack, but there are some rumors that they may be bringing MagSafe for these new MacBooks, but this MacBook Air from 2015 already has it. Now, on the other side, you can see we have that Thunderbolt 2 port, which is great. I used it quite a bit to dock up to a display. Then we have another USB port, and then we have that SD card slot. Now, the SD card slot is the number one thing that I use on my MacBook that's not there. I can go about not having an Ethernet port or this big USB port or even a headphone jack if I really didn't need to, or an HDMI port or anything. But the SD card is the one thing I use the most. It's crazy how much I use it, and unfortunately, the MacBooks don't have it anymore, and that's the weirdest thing ever. Apparently they're going to be bringing it up, but this 2015 MacBook had that capability, and that is a really cool thing thing that this device had. I think that in and of itself is one thing why this MacBook still completely holds up. And if I didn't really have a dependency of having like the craziest amount of performance or, using a really good display, I really do think this MacBook Air would still be plenty enough for my day-to-day tasks. So I think that's a really awesome thing about this MacBook. But another cool thing about this MacBook is the amount that it depreciated over time. This thing is coming up 6 years old. And because of that, this thing, the depreciation, if you look at it year after year, which I've been looking at it for the most part because I was planning on buying one and already bought one, these things have steadily been going down. There wasn't like a sharp decrease, and they're not like a crazy amount of money, but they're still definitely like holding their value pretty good. Meaning that if you buy it this year, you'll probably end up being able to resell it in like 2-3 years for maybe like $100 less, which if you think about it, isn't even that much money in terms of a depreciation cost for how much value you're getting. So you're really only spending like $100 to use this MacBook. Now, the other thing to keep in mind is that this thing did come out in a couple of different models. So it came out in a 128 gig model, which was the base model, a 256 gig model, which could go up to 512 gigs, but you can also go ahead and configure this thing to either having 4 gigs of RAM or 8 gigs of RAM. I would almost always recommend you to get as much RAM as possible. The storage is something that you can always, put in an SD card slot and expand the storage or a USB drive or whatever. But the RAM, there's really nothing you can do about it. I'm unsure if you can modify the RAM on these things. I want to say you might be able to, but don't take my word for it. And the battery life is one of those things that this MacBook really killed it in. I really do think the battery life on this thing was pretty good for the most part. And I think the body, the port selection, and the battery life are some of those crazy cool things about this device that are still going to be holding the test of time for a very long amount of time. Now, stepping it up and talking about the performance and pretty much ending it off here, this is one of those areas that this MacBook is really just going to perform depending on what you're going to do with it. Now, that seems pretty basic and it seems like an obvious thing to say, but this is pretty much what I mean by that. If you're somebody who pretty much all you do is just like watch videos, maybe you're a student and you type up docs and you type up documents, and maybe you do watch some videos and have to, turn on work, whatever the case is, or you're somebody who has to program or do some other stuff like that, I think, to be honest, the most part, you're going to be getting a solid experience from this thing. It just kind of comes down to what you want from this device. You know what I mean? If you're trying to, do the craziest amount of gaming and do some insane video editing and all that stuff, I think you'll be okay. But it may come to a point where it may not be the best performing MacBook for that day and age. And what I mean by that is with the newer type of MacBooks, with the M1 MacBook Air, that is a no-brainer. That is a solid MacBook for pretty much anyone. Like, I would recommend that to anybody. But with this MacBook Air, it doesn't have a fan, so it may thermal throttle on you. It's not guaranteed, but it may happen. And if you only get that 4 gig of RAM option, you're not going to have that insane of a performance if you're a, workhorse. If you're somebody who wants to just use a MacBook for literally everything and just, everything at all, you may run into some problems there. But if you look at it the other way, and if you look at it as a MacBook, that you're just kind of going to do some light tasks on, if you're going to do something like that, I think this MacBook is going to be perfectly fine there. But if you're trying to get some crazy performance from this thing, it may not happen in the way that you're thinking, if I'm being completely honest. But I know a lot of people who've used this 2015 MacBook Air that still use it and still have a great time with it. So take it as you will, but that's pretty much how I see it in the performance standpoint. And I think, bro, to be completely honest, this MacBook is still completely worth it for the price. I think it's a solid MacBook. I think it still has a lot going for it. It's definitely not like the best MacBook of all time. I would probably give that to at least like the 2015 MacBook Pro. But I think for most people out there, if you want a MacBook that doesn't cost an insane amount of money, that kind of gets the job done, I would say go for it. I think this MacBook is a solid contender for that. I don't think it's a MacBook that I would recommend, everyone to go ahead and pick up. I would at least go ahead and recommend getting the M1 MacBook Pro or the M1 MacBook Air if you can, or maybe one of the newer Retina MacBook Airs. But I will tell you, this MacBook still has a lot going for it. I think it's a beautiful MacBook for sure, and I would still recommend picking it up. Just make sure you get the 8 gig of RAM model at the very least. If you guys have any other questions or anything like that, let me know in the comment section below. Hit the like button, that would mean so much, but definitely hit that subscribe button. Every single subscriber that we get really does count, so it means so much if you guys get that. Also, check out the other links down in the description as well. My Twitter, my Instagram, my other channels. More importantly than everything else, I love every single one of you guys. Hopefully I'll catch you guys in the next video. Peace out till then.